Hey there, my name is Cole Adams, and you are watching the best college basketball podcast out there that covers the entire sport of college basketball, brackets, bubbles, and bid stealers. Now, here are your hosts, Sam Fetterman and Jonathan Lidskin.
Season 23 of Brackets, Bubbles, and Bid Stealers. I am Sam Fetterman. That is Jonathan Lidskin. Jonathan, we were just doing this an hour ago, so I'm not going to ask you how you're doing tonight. Chris Tedinga is here with us, and we're previewing the Creighton Blue Jays. Chris, how are you?
I'm doing well, guys. It's July 30th, which is about the time in the summer where I'm ready for summer to be done and to get into fall and basketball and football and all this stuff. But we're doing well.
All right, we just talked Iowa. We're going to talk about their neighbors now in Omaha, just across the river from Iowa. Well, the state of Iowa. We'll talk about Creighton. And there's a lot of new for Creighton this year. No more Ryan Kalkbrenner. And that's kind of where I want to start because Creighton has played the Kalk drop for the last however many years. It's won 4 Defensive Players of the Year in the Big East Conference. They've been to the NCAA tournament every year for the last however long. But this team is completely different. They're going to be anchored by Owen Freeman in the low post instead. Not the greatest defender, but how can we expect Creighton's defensive game plan and just everything they do on that side of the ball that has been so distinct for the last 5 years? How can we expect that to change?
Yeah, you hit it on the head. The scheme is going to be quite a bit different, I think. Fortunately, Greg McDermott is truly one of the best at adapting his game plan to the personnel he has. You look at his rosters prior to Kalkbrenner, and they didn't use much drop coverage. It was Christian Bishop in the lane, or Jeffrey Grissel, or a whole number of guys that didn't quite play the same way Kalk did, and he adapted to Kalkbrenner. So I think we'll see a little bit of the drop stay, but yeah, you're right. Owen Freeman is a very different defender, and I think he'll be better than he was at Iowa, just some of the parts on defense type of deal. But I think the drop will still be part of it, but that probably won't be their go-to defensive set. I think they'll attack ball screens a little bit more aggressively than they have in the past 5 years.
Jonathan, what do you think about the addition of a new style to this Creighton team?
Yeah, I'm interested for sure. This is probably one of the teams that I have my eye on in terms of like how different they look schematically. I mean, this personnel is, a lot different, at least in the front court, than what they had with Kalkbrenner. Kalkbrenner wasn't, a great athlete, but he had great instincts. Obviously, was one of the elite rim protectors, if not the best rim protector in the entire sport. So now you're throwing a different look with the more athletic but smaller Owen Freeman coming off an injury. You still have McAndrew down there. I'm just, it's going to be a different defense when you can't just funnel guys to the rim anymore.
But Freeman is a different offensive player than Kalkbrenner. How would we say they compare on the other side of the ball? Chris?
Well, Freeman is certainly, from what I've seen, and fortunately Creighton played Iowa, so I was able to see Freeman live in Omaha. Freeman's much better with his back to the basket than Kalkbrenner was. Kalkbrenner was an absurd lob threat, and he stabilized the offense and could score on his own. But Owen Freeman is certainly a better shot maker and can create for himself a little bit more. I mean, you bring over him and Josh Dix from Iowa, the two main playmakers from an Iowa team that could, while it had a lot of faults, they still scored the basketball pretty darn well. So I'm very excited to kind of get, some new juice in Creighton's lineup and be a little bit less one note offensively. I think there's going to be a lot more just creation in space one-on-one than we'd seen the past couple of years.
Yeah, I agree. I think Freeman does a little bit more. He's a lot more skilled offensively. It's not as much of a lob threat type. I think 15 feet to 3 feet, he's better than Kalkbrenner. Kalkbrenner 3 feet and beyond is probably better. And I kind of think that is a place in the game where Creighton, they kind of looked against that the last couple of years. They've looked to try to funnel their games to their roster. But the way that this roster is built, they are, but the way that this year's roster is built, it's built more towards just some different looks. They do have plenty of shooters. Dix, McAndrew, both guys that they want to shoot. Harper is a guy that I want to talk about in a minute, but I don't think they're going to do the exact same stuff on either end of the floor. Their games aren't exactly going to mirror everything.
No, yeah, and a lot of these pieces, you mentioned Harper, Nick Graves, it's the type of athlete and the type of play that you just don't associate with Creighton, right? Is one-on-one creation and getting to the free throw line. These are just things that we hadn't really seen from Creighton in some time now.
Jonathan?
It's an interesting question, isn't it, Sam? Because, like Chris kind of said, I think it's an offense that's probably going to rely more on creation. Last year, Iowa was 167th nationally in defense. 18th in the Big Ten. Obviously, this isn't Iowa. They brought in two guys from Iowa. It is not Iowa. So nor would they be the 167th best defense again. I think if they had similar personnel, because that's not the kind of coach McDermott is. However, I do think that they can be the 60th ranked defense. And obviously, that wouldn't be great compared to what they've been in the past. But losing Kalk is big. Now, however, we mentioned the other there are two sides of the basketball here, and this team has shooters all over the floor. They have playmakers all over the floor. They have shot makers, guys that can get to the rim. They're athletic at some positions. I think, the worst case scenario, this is probably going to be a pretty darn good offensive team and a not so good defensive team, which still comes out to a relatively good team overall. Best case scenario. McDermott, who is very good getting his personnel to play to their strengths, gets this team to fit together on the defensive end. Offense, as expected, is very, very good. And, you're looking at a typical Creighton team that is in the mix for a 3, 4, 5, maybe even 2 seed.
All right, now I want to talk about one of my favorite players in the country this year, Blake Harper. Not even saying I think he's amazing. It's just, I think he's one of the most fascinating players in the sport, because if you pull up Blake Harper's page on KenPom from last year, which bear with me,
it's amazing.
It's going to take me a second for a freshman to do what he did. It's pretty impressive, especially if you read the Kevin Sweeney story. This was not a guy who was a super highly touted recruit. Obviously, goes to Howard. I don't think that he's this unbelievable shooter. I don't think he's this unbelievable finisher. I don't think he's this unbelievable passer. But I think at 6'8", the ability to stretch the floor like he does, the ability to put the ball on the floor like he does, and the ability to pass like he does is extremely dangerous. Now, the question is just how good is he at all of these things? Because I could see an outcome where he just kind of turns into the fifth option offensively, and that's probably the lowest ceiling outcome. But I could also see it because we really don't know how good he is, because all we've seen him do is rack up a ton of free throws where he's bigger and stronger than the rest of the competition. Now, that's not a bad thing. I'm not going to say don't do that. But he also was on a team that lost back-to-back games to Division II teams in January last year. They lost 5 games in a row to end the season. They were not very good. And he was kind of just the most athletic guy on the court. And I don't even think he's this explosive athlete, more that he's just bigger, more fluid, stronger than the rest of that league. But it's a profile that you have to take a gamble on. It's a profile that is unbelievably good. When you get a guy that can play at the 2, the 3, the 4, that can guard those positions, that can get to the basket, can draw a ton of fouls, if that's going to be his thing. I don't know if he's going to draw 64% fouls. So it'll probably be closer to 35-40. But that's still pretty good. He's an 80% free throw shooter. He can hit some outside shots. He can do a little bit of playmaking. The ceiling on Blake Harper is to be one of the best players in the Big East. The floor is to be the 5th guy on offense.
Yeah.
I think that's very fair, Sam. Go ahead, Chris.
No, I was just going to, it's kind of a unknown commodity, because you're right. We just don't Howard played Missouri and Kansas at the very beginning of the year. And the only other game that, quote unquote mattered or against a high major team was Cincinnati in early December. And he played pretty well, but Cincinnati really wasn't as good as we thought they were back then. So you're right. Like, how will he fare when he's not the biggest and strongest guy? I'm not sure. But I do know that McDermott and seemingly at practice starting out here, he has fared quite well in all the scrimmages and stuff like that. So that's good to hear.
Yeah. So Mizzou actually played Howard early last year, and I was alerted to Harper like before that game, and like what he had done so far and the talent he had. And then I looked him up, and Gonzaga kid out of DC that went to Gonzaga Prep, and a team that I'd watched a lot. And was thinking to myself, like, how did I miss this kid? And Sam, like you kind of mentioned, he doesn't have like one defining trait, but he has a lot of very good ones. And he is a very strong player that can do a lot of different things on the offensive end. It'll be interesting to see how he translates to the Big East. Obviously, not the best and like the most athletic high major league, but certainly a step up from the MEAC, which is one of the more down leagues in the country. So it's interesting if he can come in and be a rock solid player for them right away while he's getting used to the speed and athleticism of high major competition. I think he ends up being an effective player, but I do expect him to take a little bit of time just to get comfortable with what he's seeing out there.
Yeah, honestly, depending on how you feel about Blake Harper, that's like a 15 ranking swing if you're doing like a top 50, top 100 based on like how good you think Blake Harper is. They could be in the 20s, they could be in the late teens, they could be in the 30s, they could be lower than that. But that's kind of the point with this Creighton team, that we'll figure it out when we get there. Blake Harper is the huge swing piece, and I think that's really, really important to keep an eye on. Let's talk about the one starter.
Real quick, Sam, before we do move on. Generally, projecting these low major kids that move up to high majors is really difficult because, like, some of these guys, have the physical tools to translate, which I think that Blake Harper. One of the reasons I don't think he'll be an instant minus is because he does have the physical tools to scale up. But you look at a guy like Jordan Durkak last year, who was the NEC Player of the Year. It was played off the floor at the end of the year pretty much at Rutgers. So it's just so hard to project. I mean, these guys are moving up from the 30th to the 32nd best or 31st best league in the country, all the way up to a top 5 league in the country.
Yeah, with you on that. Let's talk about the one returning starter, Jackson McAndrew. We kind of mentioned Dix a little bit. We'll get into him more, but McAndrew, going into his sophomore year, Jonathan, what type of steps are you looking for Jackson McAndrew in year 2?
I think a higher usage role is probably in the cards for him with what Creighton lost. McAndrew was a really intriguing player to me in high school. He 6'10", steps out and shoots, a guy that you would think would be very good in a Greg McDermott offense. And as the year went on last year, I thought he got better. I mean, he doesn't turn it over. He can step out and shoot. Not really going to put it on the floor and beat guys off the dribble, but, not everyone can do that. And I think Creighton probably has other guys that they expect to take on that role. But I wouldn't say it's far-fetched to think that McAndrew is, a legitimate 14 to 15 point per game scorer. He has such a quick trigger from the outside that using him in a pick and pop with Graves, who's a great passer, and having Dix as your wing that you can't really hop off of because how good of a shooter he is, it opens up a lot of possibilities for McAndrew's game in his second year.
Yeah. The other thing I'd add with him is that he's added 10, 15 pounds of muscle, and that will prove very helpful for him. He had trouble in the paint last year, even corralling rebounds at times. He's a good shooter, but a little bit of a one-note type of player. This year, I think he's going to really make a leap. Like, he's got to be, for Creighton, in my opinion, now I could be wrong, but if Creighton wants to reach its absolute ceiling, I think that lies with Jackson McAndrew kind of being the alpha, the leading scorer. If Josh Dix ends up being the leading scorer, I'm not entirely sure that means Creighton is getting its best out of the roster.
Let's talk a little bit about Josh Dix. Why do you feel that Dix being the leading scorer isn't Creighton getting the best out of their roster?
Well, we've seen Josh Dix be a leading scorer. That's mostly a joke, but I think he is a very, very good spot-up shooter, and I think he would play a very good two-man, like secondary option in the offense, where if a lot of pressure is put on McAndrew or down low with Freeman, kick it out with Josh Dix and let him score that way. If he's in charge of the ball and being the main sort of distributor, if he takes over that role from Nick Graves or Howard, there's so many goddamn pieces that I kind of believe in this roster that it's hard to really understand who's going to start. But if Josh Dix is the main, PNR ball handler, let's say, I just don't think that is probably best for Creighton. I would rather see a lot of sets run for McAndrew and have Josh Dix be, the ulterior option in the corner.
Yeah, I echo that sentiment. I think Dix is a great player, especially from the perimeter, obviously. But I think we kind of have seen what his game is, and if that is his game, he's probably not the best player for a team that's a top 15 team in the country. This Creighton team is not going to be the 62nd best team in the country like Iowa was last year. I'd throw that out the window. They're going to be better defensively than that, but I think offensively, if Dix is their best player, it gives them a cap on how good the offense can be. And I don't mean that in a bad way. If Dix is their best player offensively, they're probably still a top 20 offense at the very worst. But if a guy like McAndrew ends up being their best offensive player, that's where you could see Creighton being maybe a top 5 offense, just because we know what we're getting from Dix. It depends on the other guys on that end of the floor to see how far that offense can truly go.
100%. Yeah, the one question I'd have for you guys, I don't mean to commandeer things, but how do you see that opening day lineup shape out? Because we haven't even talked about Fedor Zugic, who got eligibility back, and he's in the mix, and he played really well.
I think we kind of figured last year that he's not as big of a deal as we thought he was going to be. Good player. But probably not.
He has some continuity in the system now, and maybe they go with him over Blake Harper to begin things. We haven't talked about Jason Green either.
I would be a little concerned if Harper's not starting opening day. I think Harper's the ceiling piece, as I mentioned. But I do want to talk about Jason Green, Ty Davis, Isaac Trout, guys that have been there, Zugic as well. Which of those guys do you think is most in line to have a big year?
I'll go with most important year, and that's Jason Green, because I think he's their best interior defender. He was kind of a fantastic defender for Creighton last year, especially down the stretch. I mean, they put him on RJ Lewis against St. John's. They put him on Liam McNeely most of the game against UConn in the Big East tournament. He was kind of the alpha defender outside of, obviously, Kalkbrenner manning the middle. So I think without Kalkbrenner, having a really steady defensive piece like Jason Green, who brings a lot of energy on that side, is super, super important. So they got to find a way to get him minutes, frankly, just for the defensive end. And if he can improve the jumper, then, all the best. That's great. So
can I just say that I don't think that Green starting over Harper to start the year would necessarily be a bad thing. There are 4 guys here who we know are really good offensive players: Graves, Dix, McAndrew, Freeman. Harper was a 27% usage guy at Howard. Green was 13% last year at Creighton and was fairly efficient in that regard. He's a guy that knows his role and knows the system. So it wouldn't shock me at all. And like you said, he's a good interior defender. So you don't need a more off. If you trust those 4 guys, you don't really need a more offensive slanted player as your 5th starter.
All right. Let's talk a little bit about Alexei Dmitrievich, the European kid coming over. Is this someone that we need to be thinking about in year one? Is he kind of the backup big that you can play a little more drop coverage with?
Let's just say, you know what? There's some things going on behind the scenes that aren't sort of finalized there. But let's just say I don't think you have to worry about him in year one at all.
Okay. Anything else we want to add? Nick Graves. We have to talk about Nick Graves.
Yeah.
This team's point guard, Nick Graves, Ty Davis. How are we feeling about the point guard rotation? What do we think Graves is going to give? What do we think Davis is going to give? And how much do you think Graves impacts the game?
That's a tough one for me. I didn't watch too much Charlotte ball last year until Nick Graves' commitment, and then I watched a couple games just to sort of see what he got. I know he gets to the line a ton, and he's a physical guard that can get to the rack and create pretty well. And you look at the last few Creighton teams, right? Stephen Ashworth, Ryan Nemhard being the guys at the helm manning, the point guard position. Nick Graves is going to be a little bit different with how he approaches the offense, but I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. I do think he will be tasked with almost all the point guard duties along with Josh Graves. Ty Davis is coming along, and I think he's going to be a pretty darn good player, but I think he's still maybe a year away from a big-time role.
All right, Jonathan, anything else to add before we go?
Yeah, no. Chris said everything I wanted to about Graves. Excellent point guard. Definitely different from what they've had the past couple years, but I'm not necessarily sure with what the rest of this roster has that's a bad thing.
All right, Jonathan, you want to take us home?
Yeah, if you came to hear about Tyler Self and where he's working, you came to the right place. If you came to hear about, I don't know, Creighton's European guys being a factor in getting eligibility, you came to the right place. And if you came to hear about the latest happenings with Caleb Grill, you came to the right place. This has been Season 6, Episode 23, Brackets, Bubbles, and Bid Stealers, Tip-Off Talk, Creighton Edition. We'll see you next time.